when they show signs of disengaging from school. So I tell this story, we had, I forget which session it was, but we had a discussion about how do you talk to policymakers about your research? How do you take research and make it accessible and get people excited about it? And I have this story I like to tell that if it was possible on the first day of school to give every student a red shirt, a yellow shirt, and a green shirt, and send them home with those shirts, and just say to them, now, when you're having a really good day, when you feel fine, put the green shirt on, right? Put the green shirt on, come to school, and I'll just wave to you, say hello, nice to see you, and know that you're doing all right. If you're not sure, or you're kind of having a bad day, put the yellow shirt on. That would be helpful. If you put the yellow shirt on, then I know, well, I should probably check in with you a little bit more. Maybe there's something else I need to do. Maybe I should get some resources to you. And by all means, if you are having a really bad day, if something is really going wrong, if you've failed an exam, or you just are really feeling badly, put the red shirt on so I can know right away that you need some additional help and make those changes. It's kind of, maybe it's a little bit funny to think about that, but it's really part of what we try to do. We try to be able to switch resources, be able to know as kids move in and out of risk, as they have certain strengths or as they have those strengths taken away. And so that was the idea behind Check and Connect, was to focus on the data and be able to have mentors who are already connected with students who can make those changes. So the mentors even follow the students from school to school. Now you can see some of the problems with trying to carry this out sometimes, but the student would arrive in a new school and not know anybody else, but there's their mentor. So you can see with the attachment ideas and the resilience and the stability sort of play out. So 4 big perspectives are part of Check and Connect. Systems ecological. Is there alignment between the home and the school? Are the student needs considered not only in the home, but in the school and the community? Can the mentor help make that happen? Resilience. Do people believe, including the mentor, that the student is capable of being successful? Are they able to sort of give them resources as they're needed? And it's very context dependent, because you have to know in this setting what community resources are available, what's available at the school, what's available at home. And then cognitive behavioral. So the working process really involves trying to solve problems, trying to help the student become more self-determined, trying to help them become more autonomously motivated. I said I would talk about the research just a bit, and I will. Again, this big tome, I understand you have this in your library, so it is available. I found it much easier to download. I don't know if you have that capacity, or you have that version, but at Georgia we can download it electronically. It's much lighter in electronic version than it is here. Dr. Burton was joking that this would be very good for stopping the door in case there was a strong wind also, so it has that use if it needs to be done. But really, we know there are developmental pathways from early childhood to dropout or completion. We know that there are long-term positive impacts when we intervene really intensely in early childhood. And we know that it relates to achievement and graduation. And we think it relates possibly through some of these theories like Jeremy Finn, that if you come to school and you can participate, you will feel successful, and then you can identify or value and belong in the school. Again, Check and Connect is very much about the context and being sure that we don't generalize across settings, because settings have different specific resources and needs. So what did we learn in Check and Connect that brought out this definition of engagement? We learned that it was more than academic and behavioral engagement. We started off with, and I did this, I went to the schools and I had a paper table, and I would go to the office and I would say, I needed to ask about 10 students. Can you tell me how many days absent this student was? Can you tell me, how many behavioral incidents? Can you tell me how they've done on assignments? All that information. I'm very happy that we now have mobile phones and computers, and we can just get the data much easier. It also had to do with the information we had being very updated frequently, being something that we can get quickly and over again. So if I come next week and I've done something, I've intervened between this week and next week, do I see a change in that student? Or a week, or 2 weeks out, or a month out, so that we can be very fluid and flexible with the students. And it has, again, foundations in dropout prevention, school completion. The idea of engagement has There have been discussions about, is it a process, is it an outcome, is it both? And we contend that it depends on how long you look out. What is your range of looking? What is your scope? What portion are you viewing? Also, we understand that dropout or completion are really long-term processes. They have early events, early roots, and if we understand that and we can get to that early, we have a better chance of being successful in our work. So Jeremy Finn's idea is really this idea of participation, school success, identification. That if kids come in and they have the capacity to be part of the school and to be successful academically, then they want to continue to do that work, and they feel like that the school, that school is a place where they can have not only their needs met for belonging, but that they can actually, it will support them in trying to achieve whatever it is they want to achieve or where they want to go. And that has sort of this upward spiral of benefits. The reverse of this is non-participation, poor school results, and withdrawal. So again, another piece that underlies our definition. And unlike Dr. Burden, I think who promised us that we would not see a table, a graph, or an equation anywhere in the entire presentation, for those of you who are on the edge of your seats, extremely excited, can't wait to see the data, or show me the equation, we will have equations, we will have data, and my wife likes to tell me she has actually set up a limit. I have only, it used to be 10 minutes, but I think I abused it. I now only have 5 minutes, I believe, where I can talk about statistics or methodology in the house. And after that, she'll give me 5 minutes of listening, and then she's done. So I have to prepare very thoughtfully before I go home about what the key points are of new things I've learned or what I'm excited about. So, but don't worry, we have plenty of that for you to see. So one of the big projects of the work in the handbook was to take people who tended to focus mainly on motivational perspectives, and then also those who tended to focus more on school completion or post-secondary, where I would consider myself, and say, where are the places where we have some common ground? Where can we actually talk about engagement and feel like we can meet at the same place? So the definition that came out of this work is the one that you see before you. I don't think it's that much different than what we've worked with before, except that it involves active participation, academic and co-curricular or school-related activities. Commitment is something we're very comfortable with. Finding learning meaningful, invested in learning in the future. It's a definition that we think works both for motivational researchers and for post-secondary. What I'm going to talk about in a bit is this idea that I think some of the differences we have to do with how long we look, where our scope is, what our actual thinking is on where engagement is happening and where we want to see the outcomes. So as a school completion or dropout researcher, I tend to think about everything that's happening in terms of how does that relate to 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 years down the road. Do they graduate? Are they ready for college? That type of work. Now, I'm not missing the idea that there are many steps in between, and that's one of the places where I think that school completion researchers who have that view out to that point can benefit from some of the work that motivational researchers have done with very short time sequences and very well-defined constructs. But what we'll see is that when you're looking that far out, something that's really small can be aggregated up and aggregated up a little more and still be a very meaningful, formative predictor out to that. So this is my little, really rough graph of that. So if we think about engagement as a process, and we think about if kids are more engaged, what do we think about in terms of a semester grade? I think most of us would hypothesize, and the data we've seen would suggest that if you are more engaged, we would expect that you would do better on that grade or have a higher GPA or that type of thing. We might also suspect that your engagement would increase. So we see a scenario where engagement is a process and engagement is an outcome. I would contend that as we look toward on-time graduation, we're in the situation where we see this over and over again. Engagement as process and outcome, and process and outcome. And some of the thinking that we do in school completion research is aggregating some of these things up in our predictions out to here. So it may be beneficial for school completion researchers to do some unpacking of those aggregations, of those summaries. And it may be useful for motivational researchers to think about how something happening here relates to a much longer time frame. I put this quote up here from Jackie Eccles. I thought it was pretty useful. But if our goal is to reduce dropout rates, then increasing the salience and number of reasons students have to stay in school until graduation could be the most efficient strategy. If our goal is to increase science or math or English literacy and understanding, then we should probably focus on more specific targeted strategies within these classrooms. We worry that using a single phrase like increasing engagement for both of these types of intervention strategies decreases the likelihood that the most efficient strategies will be picked for these two different types of outcomes. I was in a session this morning and we had this very discussion. Do we expect that if we have different outcomes, do we expect that the antecedents are different? Do we think that the things that predict engagement for us would be different? Do we suspect maybe that the engagement subtypes that might be more active would be different? I don't know. It's a good question. In terms of outcomes, we have many different outcomes in which we're interested. So I think this is a research question that certainly has a lot more work that can be done with it. So I entitled this slide, "Can't We All Just Get Along?" I don't know, maybe the engagement research community doesn't feel contentious at times, but I think that as we try to sort out our definitions, we can learn a lot from the different perspectives that we have. Oh, sorry, that was unintentional, actually. So, let me ask you a question, just to get our minds sort of into this. I'm going to go with a polling method here. I guess this will be somewhat non-scientific. I won't be collecting the data from you. But thinking for a moment about whether something is an outcome or whether something is engagement proper, engagement itself. Let's take the end of course grade. How many people, raise your hand if you think that would be an outcome in your way of thinking about engagement. Don't be shy, no one's getting graded on this. End of course, so the complete course is finished and you've gotten a grade. Is that an outcome or is that engagement? I'm not judging anybody. My daughter says this to me, don't judge. I'm not judging anybody. Okay, how about engagement? Any people think that it's engagement? Okay, so we have a couple. What about grade on an end of chapter quiz? So that's happening a little closer in time. Outcome. Have some outcomes, okay. Engagement. Have a few more engagement. Okay, I like this distribution. All right, grades on an in-class task. Outcome. Grades on an in-class task. Outcome. Okay, we have some people. Oh, okay, we have. It's not locked in once you place your vote. You can retract it, so it's open like that. Engagement for a grade on an in-class task. Okay. Now we're in the world of technology. You're using a mobile device in the classroom, and you're getting a grade based upon how you respond to the teacher checking in with you on whether you're understanding something. Outcome? Fewer. Engagement? More of us think engagement. Now let me blow your mind a little bit. How many of you are science fiction fans? Any science? Oh, we have some. Excellent. Okay. I thought in psychologists you'd at least have the Isaac Asimov Foundation fans who love the psychologist controlling the world idea. But I'm thinking a little more of the iRobot sort of genre, or maybe even The Matrix, the movie The Matrix. But data mined. Okay, so a data mining effort that takes a video segment that students are processing, and every second it's happening, it is actually gathering data about where students are rewinding, which questions they're putting in, and it is assigning them a grade based upon, and now this isn't a grade for the grade book, but this is an actual assessment of how well they have the content. Is that engagement or an outcome? Let's do outcome first. Outcome? Outcome, okay. Engagement? Okay, thank you. You're all very good sports. I appreciate that. My reason for just asking this question, I don't have an answer. But I go back to the phrase, the best model of a cat is a cat, right? So if I want to, if I want the best existing model of anything, it is the thing itself. The problem is we really can't use that because it's so complex. So I wonder sometimes with engagement if where we're making meaningful conceptual differences, where something is really different, this is really motivation and not engagement, or this is really engagement and not motivation. And where we're actually dealing more with measurement issues. If we could measure at a finer level, if the technology increased, maybe this would be part of engagement. The reason I ask is because part of the Check and Connect work and the conceptualization of engagement has been about being as unintrusive as possible in getting our data, and also getting it as often as we can. So having the changes be as dynamic and informative as possible. Am I okay on the mic here? I think I sort of wander away sometimes. Have I been wandering away? Okay, good. I can't tell sometimes with this. So our model, I think in many cases, looks similar to what you've seen before, with an idea of the context influencing subtypes of engagement. I think one of the differences is that we tend to query affective and cognitive engagement, and we tend to survey affective and cognitive engagement through the student engagement instrument, and we tend to actually extract from existing data sources behavioral and academic engagement. Now, we supplement it sometimes, but we go frequently we're extracting it. We also see it different, the actual context as it really exists and students' perceptions of the context. So those are some differences that I think that might exist. And then, of course, the typical outcomes that are very short-term outcomes. And then where we focus a lot of our attention, these long-term outcomes. Do you graduate? Do you have opportunities in post-secondary? Beyond that, are you a productive citizen? Are you able to contribute cognitively to our country and to our community? So it's been a long time. We've been waiting for data, right? We've been waiting. People have been waiting for alpha coefficients. You've been waiting for our MSEAs, right? Well, the time has arrived. Here it is. So we have on our scale 9 items that measure teacher-student relationships, 9 that measure control and relevance of schoolwork, 6 that measure peer support for learning, 5 that measure future aspirations and goals, and 4 that measure family support for learning. 1, 3, and 5 fit under the affective engagement, and 2 and 4 in our paradigm fit under the cognitive engagement. The initial work we've done with this was a sample that was from the Southeast and Midwest, and you can see the characteristics of it. We actually fit the model to all the data, but then conducted a measurement and variance study to look at whether or not across gender and across grade levels, the same model fits. So we looked at how items loaded in terms of where they loaded. We looked at how strongly they loaded. We looked at their error terms, and then we looked at their covariances. And across those, evaluated the CFI and the BIC, noting that the lowest BIC was actually in the most restrictive condition. So we established, we believe, measurement and variance with the student engagement instrument. We also have had several translated versions of the SEI that are out there. And I would view my approach to international research as open source. So I don't know how well that works with research, but that's my approach. I tend to like it for software development, and it frees up people to do individual things in their communities with the survey. But where we actually have them, translations in existence are here. They're either completed or in the process. And we had some results presented at the conference this morning, actually. So thank you to my Finnish and my Portuguese colleagues for their presentation. But what they did is they compared the Portuguese and the Finnish samples on the student engagement instrument with these characteristics for their samples, noting there were some differences between in ages and in terms of actually one extra factor for the Portuguese sample. They also noted that first order factor fit well, but also the second order, which was affective engagement above the 3 that I pointed out, and cognitive engagement above the 2 that I pointed out. So we have the coefficient alphas down here, stronger in the Finnish sample than in the Portuguese sample. And we did note some interesting differences. So this raises a question that I'll come back to at the end, but in scale development, when we see differences, how do we distinguish from a cultural difference where we are actually needing to measure the latent construct differently because of whatever cultural factors exist, versus where an item is just functioning differently and maybe inappropriately in that context? So for example, one of the items that we found operating interestingly was I feel safe at school, which within the American sample loaded on the teacher-student relationships factor We don't know why, maybe because of the actual more higher levels efforts to preserve that, but loaded on the peer support at school in both the Portuguese and the Finnish samples. So it's an interesting question that we don't have an answer to yet. We have also fit in our model in the US with several samples this higher order factor, and also had done some work with the residuals and trying to see what was left over after we partial pieces of it out. Another step that we took, which was done recently, was an effort, because we intended to use engagement with several different subsamples, to see how the factor structure held up with a random sample of different subgroups. So students who are receiving special education services, students who, in general, students who are receiving it for certain subtypes like emotional or behavioral disorders versus specific learning disability, students who have had low achievement over time, students who have had a high number of office referrals, students who have dropped out or are in an alternative school, students receiving English learner who are receiving English learners services, and students who are in poverty. And what we found across the board is that the structure, according to the fit statistics that we set out, the criteria we set out, seemed to fit pretty well across those subgroups. Another piece of work that we did was looking at predictive validity, both short-term and then looking at longer-term. So this represents 3 years of data, 2007, 8, 8, 9, 9, 10, and these are the characteristics of the sample by ethnicity, by gender, and by the different sub-characteristics that we have an interest in looking at sometimes. What we find is this sort of patterning across the board. When we separate out those highest engaged kids, those middle engaged kids, and those lowest engaged kids, across the board we see this patterning, and every difference is significant, except for the high school, where we had a very minimal competency test. So we're checking again now with the better test that we have in our newer data. But we see that the least engaged kids have the fewest incidents. The moderately engaged kids have a middle amount, and the highest engaged the highest engaged kids have the least. The moderately engaged have a middle amount, and the least engaged kids have the most. We see that across the incidents they have per semester and suspension days. You know, and sometimes as high as 1.5, 1.5 suspension days different for kids who are least engaged versus most engaged. We also see differences in achievement, and the order reverses like we'd expect. So again, significant, and what it means in terms of our state tests is that the students who are least engaged differ from the students who are most engaged by almost a half to 3/4 of the space on the scale between does not meet expectations and meets expectations. So it's quite a big space that we find these differences in. We also looked out to graduation. So this is looking at a sample of students in 9th grade. We surveyed them on the student engagement instrument. And what we did is we said, let's look now 4 years out and see how many of these students have graduated on time. Single measurement in 9th grade, how many graduated on time. This is, incidentally, policy-wise, one of the graphs that we tend to use in talking to senior level folks. I think they tend to get it, but the idea is that down here we have strongly disagree, disagree, agree, and strongly agree. So we have the 4 points on the original scale. And then we have here the proportion of on-time graduates. The size of the circle is related to how many kids are in that circle. Just like you've probably found in your instruments, we tend to have a lot of kids that endorse highly on the survey. It's negatively skewed. So what we find is this sort of patterning. The kids who responded in 9th grade, remember, at the very lowest levels, graduated at much lower rates in terms of on-time graduation than the kids who responded at the higher levels. It's not a perfect relationship all the time, but it's pretty consistent in our data. And the differences can be as much, and this is a factor that sort of holds up across our work. Future goals and aspirations, 0.40 or 40% who responded at disagree or strongly disagree versus 73% who responded strongly agree. This is in 9th grade, so their perceptions in 9th grade related to 4 years later how they did in graduation. We weren't happy with just graphs, and so we decided we needed to make some models. So we used a multi-level survival analysis model because we knew that graduation is sort of a truncated value. We tend to sort of it ends, but we don't really know what happens after that. So we use that model to look at the usual suspects in terms of demographic characteristics, achievement, and behavior, but then also two of the student engagement factors that seem to be the highest related to long-term outcomes for students: future goals and aspirations and family support for learning. What we found is that beyond achievement, both of these predicted beyond achievement, and in odds ratio terms, you were twice as likely to drop out if you went down in your engagement in either of those factors. The actual factor of family support for learning held up beyond achievement and even with behavior in the model. So we had all the background characteristics, achievement, and behavior, and that was still predictive. Now, I don't know how everybody perceives, working with families, but because of my Check and Connect background, we perceived the family as influenceable. We perceived that schools could do things to change family interactions with schools, and so that's a meaningful finding for us. Also, we looked at not just graduation, but what happened to kids after graduation. How many enrolled in college? And so this is another look in the same kind of format, which basically says we started off with the student engagement instrument on a 4-point scale. We added a neither agree nor disagree in 2008-9 because it was useful in terms of increasing the variability on the responses. So we have 5 response options: strongly disagree, disagree, neither, agree nor disagree, agree, or strongly agree. And what we did is we said, what did your responses tend to be across your time in high school? And how did that relate to whether or not you actually enrolled in college? Not did you graduate, not did you have characteristics that seemed to make you college ready, but did you actually get into a college? Did you actually arrive in our college data? And what we found is that some of the same factors that predicted really well to graduation were very influential here. Probably the most is the future goals and aspirations, with 15% of kids who tended to strongly disagree, 15% of them enrolling in college. In contrast, almost 66%, 67% of students who strongly agreed ended up enrolling in college. So, and you see the pattern is very, very linear. So we have questions to investigate in some of these, either very high end or very tails. I was very interested to learn, Dr. Convoy, of the curves you all were finding, and Dr. Vega in your data, thinking maybe there's something similar in what we're seeing here, that that those tails are behaving a little oddly. Okay, so you've had the theory and application, the theory and the actual results. You've also had this idea of, okay, show me the data. What do you find in your results with the survey instrument and related to outcomes of interest? What I really want to spend some time on is, okay, so what? So how do you make this applicable in a school setting? How do you deliver it? How can people act on it? That sort of thing. So I'm going to show you a couple of things. One is our portal system. So basically, teachers log into the internet, into the portal, and they get their email and everything else they do for teaching in this location. What they also get is their student engagement results. And we tried to make these engagement results meaningful, and one of the challenges was, how do you do that? So what we did is we actually, by level, looked at the percentiles of the district and said, where is a student within the district distribution at elementary level, at middle level, and at high school level. And then it gave them a percentile and also showed the 25th and the 75th percentile so they could quickly get some sense over time of how students were doing. For instance, this student here in Control and Relevance of Schoolwork, 2007 fall, 2008 spring, 8 fall, 9 spring, 9 fall, you get a pretty quick view of whether or not the student seems to be stably engaged or if they're moving around quite a bit. Now, a challenge we have, and this is still maybe an open challenge, is, and actually with the international group, you might have a very good opportunity to do this, but how do we norm? This is normed on our district, but if the school doesn't respond one year or we have some big changes, how much do the norms move around? Maybe at an international level, there's a chance to norm more broadly. We also took action on indicators in our data that were very strong predictors of not graduating on time. This comes out of the University of Chicago work. What we found is that if students were off track in 9th grade, now if they're off track after 9th grade, that still gives you, in our system, 10th grade, 11th grade, and 12th grade to take action, and very directed action. off track here means that they either failed one of their courses, a semester of their course, or they didn't accrue enough credits to get to the next level, to get to 10th grade. What we found in our data is that 82% of our students who were off track in 9th grade did not graduate on time. 82% of them. 10,000 of these 12,000 students across 3 cohorts. Now I want to ask you a question again. This is audience participation time. So if we look here and say, okay, of all these groups of 3rd graders we started out with, 60% graduated on time. That's 22,000 kids. 15,000, almost 40%, didn't graduate on time. The question about the off-track indicator always raises the next question of, the idea of the off-track indicator raises the question of, well, did they get out in 5 years? Maybe they just got behind and they got out. So I'm going to just poll the audience here, unscientific again, and nobody's judging. When you think about those 14,798 kids, that's 40%, what percentage of those do you think graduated in 5 years? Let me see the 20% or higher group. 20% or higher. Okay, a couple of you. I sort of gave you a little indication there. 15%? 15% of those kids. Okay, some hands. Jump in. 10%? Somewhere on the 10%. 5%? 5%. Okay. Let's be very depressed about this. 1%. Yeah, wearing the red shirt. 1%. Any 1%ers? Okay, let me see the 5% hands. 5%, exactly, 5%, 752 kids were all that made it out the next year. So something fundamentally different happened. And what we found is that of these 40%, 68% of them, 10,000 of these kids, of these 14,798, were off track in 9th grade. But the problem was we didn't know it. In our data as a school system, we couldn't access it, we couldn't get to it. People who were working with the students didn't know about it. So as part of our engagement work, we've set out to sort of change that. What I'm showing you here is something that we've been working on with IBM, our IBM partners in the district. They really are just consultants that sort of do what we tell them to do. So it's just having added resources to sort of boss around and say, please make this or make that and make it accessible. But what we did here is we decided that we wanted to make information about indicators of engagement data that lived inside of our data systems, attendance information, behavior information, and course performance information, accessible to everybody. And we wanted to, what we did is we linked everything to on-time graduation and said, what are the thresholds that are predictive and put a student most at risk for not graduating on time. And then what we did is teachers themselves can come in here and pick out, they get their information right through the same portal as the student engagement information. They can filter more broadly if they want, but the main thing that they're able to see is they can quickly see students that are showing ABC risk right now, so they have one or more of these risks. Students who are on the bubble, these are kids who are not at risk yet, but if we want to be preventative, we want to know as they approach risk, so are they getting close? And then students who are showing no risk. We also show changes down or up from the last week. And this is dynamic data. Every night, the whole system, 165,000 students are updated. And every element in here changes for the next day. So the 8 students are down here, the 5 are down here, and the 3 are over here. And the actual indicator that's showing up, attendance and course performance, is shown here. What's then possible is, for instance, you can click into this group of 8 kids, and what you get is this. We term this the iPhone effort. By that I just mean that we tried to make it as simple as possible. Give me only the minimal data I need, but let me expand and go dig deeper if I want to. And so the first view they have is just a collapsed version like this that shows by indicator what their actual level, what the characteristic was that triggered that flag. And so, for instance, Chan Rowan here, these are all de-identified, by the way. Chan Rowan is showing strength in math and science, but not in language arts or social studies. So, possibly, this is an area we can focus on for strengths, and here are some areas we need to think about for concerns. We can also look and see over time how many credits has this student failed. We can look and see how many they've passed. We can get very detailed information in any of these blue links. But what it does is it allows us to make hypotheses, at least as a data team initially, and then test them somewhat by going to the data source. Here we have their reading score in terms of the Lexile, that actually flips into the location where it fits. So if it's above the 25th percentile and below the 75th, this score would be in the middle, because it's higher at the high end. If it was lower than the 25th, it would be at the bottom end. But very quickly, you can get all of this information and as a team start deciding what to do. If you click into the name, it actually would take you back to the engagement information, and you have that as well as some other data there to work with. A couple other things. We showed last year's value to set a context for the students' engagement in prior years. And then every month we actually start the clock over. So that's really based on intervention. Each month you have a new slate, a clean slate. So if I did something and it worked for 1 month, I could actually see it in the months that are clear where the student has had some successes. And then another point, which was, I thought, a very well made one, was provided by some senior level administrators who said, listen, thanks for all your statistics. That's nice. I like that you do this kind of stuff. It's helpful for us. But I have a better prediction. If the student doesn't meet graduation requirements, they're not going to graduate. And so, obviously this is sort of the real life work that happens. And we said, that's a good point. So we'll make something available here so you can know, look into kids who are missing graduation requirements. And something that blew me away in terms of data was just how difficult it was to know whether kids were on track in data systems, how much information was lost where you couldn't figure out if they actually were on pace or not. So that's something that is still a work in progress. We also have the ability to click in by area of concern. If you want to work on just attendance, just behavior, just course performance with a subset of kids, you could do that. In terms of context, at the senior level, at the school level, at the district level, you can see what the trend was last year and where you are relative to it this year. So you can think about if the school is making progress over what happened last year. And then possibly my single most favorite feature is not these pie charts. These were actually meant to show the proportion of kids in your school by color, but then the proportion at risk by the darkened color. But I think what people do there, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I use the term interocular analysis, but really it's this eyeballing idea. Well, how many kids that are in this pie chart are probably also in this pie chart, in this section of that pie chart, maybe in this pie chart. And so what we decided we could do is just take the guessing out of it, and we could actually cross every single possible combination that existed with all these characteristics and produce a cross tabulation behind the scenes, and then just give them the proportion of kids that were at risk, give them the top 10 proportions, and show them the characteristics so they could think about what the actual, generate some hypotheses and see the students who are there. They can also extract the students who are not at risk in that sample and say, well, what is it about this group or that group that's having some challenges? And then finally, we knew that it was important, since progress toward graduation happens across levels, that we give people in high school access to who sent them their middle school students who had some challenges when they arrived at their school. So what percentage of kids arrived at your school with some risk factors already, and let the principals or the leaders of the schools have the conversations, the tougher conversations about what's happening at your school that's giving me so many more students at this level, and it really helps them focus on being thinking across grade levels that elementary schools are thinking about school completion, so are middle schools, so are high schools. So that takes me to just some conclusions here and then some time for questions. I promised equations. I made sure that I didn't let you down by not giving you an equation. But where do we see this going? I think we see the need for individual student trajectories. So some growth mixture modeling, perhaps, that lets us know that maybe there's a different sort of trajectory for one student versus another student. We also have gotten into, and I've talked to a couple of you about this, but this sort of geeking out with data mining and machine learning and such, where ensemble models can give you an estimate of how maximally predictive you can be, but it can be so black box that it's really hard to actually take apart and know why it happened. But you can back down from there and fit some linear models that may not be as predictive, but are much more understandable, and get a sense of how good they are by how close they are to that actual percentage. So that's something we want to do. We also are thinking about, we all of us have done these classical theory tests of confirmatory factor analysis, and they're nice and they're important and we need to do them. But when we think about engagement as a continuum, if we start thinking more in terms of item response theory models, can we actually test a number of items and make sure that we have an item at each location along that latent trait to capture those students. Also, Charles Darr from, I think he's New Zealand, did some interesting work where he actually made meaning out of locations on the scale by where kids first started to endorse a negative item. And so it was really, you were able to say, oh, here's a location where they first start becoming engaged. Here's where they actually first start becoming disengaged. More formative data points. I get excited about the iRobot, the Matrix, all that sort of stuff. A little bit, a little worried too, but a little excited. And learning management systems are making so many data points available to us. Anytime a student accesses content, when the classroom is flipped in their home accessing video and they rewind or they go ahead, when they interact with students about content, social network analysis is providing us information about who's connected to who, whether it's in the context of bullying and who's the bully and who's the victim, or whether it's in the context of who must be friends with who because they're interacting so often, or how often does this teacher interact with that student. So I think there's a lot of capacity for us to mine that and supplement our engagement data with more and more unintrusive data while still getting the important survey pieces that we need, that we can't get as often, but we need. Level of measurement, we've talked about this. Is it a school level? Is it a classroom level? What is it? Where do we need to measure every classroom? Can we get something at the school level that we know a threshold exists at some point where students become disengaged? The order of change. Does it happen first in affective and cognitive, which is what we would speculate, and then you start to see behaviors and you start to see attendance change? What about when you're surveying behavioral engagement data? Do you see surveyed responses on affective and cognitive change before surveyed on behavioral? I don't know. It's an interesting question, I think. What we know in terms of where we are right now, we know that our responses are pretty stable and predictive across grades and gender. We know that on-time graduation and college going can be predicted by our student engagement instrument. We know it's predictive of dropout beyond attendance, behaviors, and achievement. And we know that the translated versions are structurally similar. Now we're still waiting on results from our other open source people who are out there doing their work, but that would be interesting. I talked a bit about the second bullet point, but the first one is we have data now on engagement from 2007-8 all the way out to now. So we have 6 years of data that we've been collecting. So there's a lot we can do longitudinally to look at that. Big data, it sort of gets a bad rap, big data, especially with if you've read about the National Security Agency in the US and Andrew Snowden and Big Brother's watching. But there really are a lot of information that could be thoughtfully used as well if done appropriately. And then I think increased precision of measurement. This is just a comment on the item response theory. I guess probably with our measures we'd be using you would know what's my acronym? Rating scale model. Sorry, rating scale model. So there are some models that let us do categorical analysis. I was hoping to draw from Dr. Convoy's experience at University of Iowa. So, but that's all I have, and I would welcome any questions. Here is my email, and Dr. Rushley and Dr. Christensen, but I would welcome any questions on the time that we have remaining. So, thank you.